My name is Phil Thornton, and I'm an editor of the website londonsummit.gov.uk, which has been set up within the Foreign Office to gather a debate from around the world of the issues that are likely to come up at the G20 Heads of State meeting on the 2nd of April. This weekend is the meeting of finance ministers and central bankers of the G20, which will be chaired by the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Alistair, who joins us now. Chancellor, this weekend you'll be chairing the meeting of the G20 finance ministers and central bankers. Now, you've just come back from Europe, where, according to some media reports, there have been different priorities emerging over the need for a fiscal stimulus or for tighter banking regulation. Are you going to be able to bring those views together this weekend?
I think there's pretty much agreement that two things are necessary on both sides of the Atlantic. One is to ensure that we do support our economies, the fiscal stimulus that people have been talking about. But secondly, also, and this is critical, and that is to clean up the banks' balance sheets and to ensure that banks can start to be effective and start lending into the economy again. There is recognition on both sides of the Atlantic that this action needs to be taken, and I'm sure that it is recognised by other countries across the whole G20 too.
I was about to ask, we've had the European view, but what about powerful emerging countries like China and India? Where do they stand on these issues?
What has changed even in the last few months is that countries in every part of the world now recognise the severe nature of the downturn. They recognise that we're all in it together. No country can go it alone. But I think the other thing that's pretty critical is that in the past, the older, the more developed countries have thought they can sort all this out themselves. We need the developing, we need the emerging economies to be in here. I mean, China's the third largest economy. You've got big, important economic players in India and South America and Asian markets too. We all need to come together. The G20 represents 80% of the world economy, and there shouldn't be any problem that isn't too big for us to try and resolve.
Now, this weekend's meeting is a preparatory meeting for the actual London summit on the 2nd of April of leaders of government and heads of state. Perhaps there's a bit of expectations being built up around this one meeting. How are you going to manage the expectations that this meeting will produce something? And will that something be clear principles or specific new guidelines?
We're meeting at a time of pretty rapid change. Conditions in the world economy have deteriorated, especially at the back end of 2008. So I haven't the slightest doubt that what we've got is a process here. It will start this weekend. We hope at the beginning of April we will have very clear and concrete proposals that will help countries work together. But of course, after that, we will continue to respond as we need to. People would expect us that as the facts change, you need to respond to those changing developments. So this, I think, is very much a process, but it would be a huge mistake, I think, if countries didn't accept that this is one of those few occasions that occur in a century where action is needed, action's needed immediately, and we need to take action together, and it can make a real difference to the people who sent us here.
One issue that some smaller countries are particularly interested in is reform of the IMF, both in terms of more resources and perhaps more importantly the governance of the IMF, which hasn't broadly been reformed since the Second World War. Is that something that's likely to come out of this meeting?
Reform of international financial institutions, including the IMF, I think is important. Two things are necessary. One is now to have a substantial increase in the amount of money that is available so they can intervene earlier when countries might be facing problems. But of course, governance is important as well. Countries have got to be able to have their say. I think it would be a big mistake if we spent all our time talking about constitutions instead of acting, but the two things go together.
My last question is on protectionism. 2 weeks ago, this seemed to be a huge issue that actually threatened to possibly derail the process. Do we think we've now moved on, that there really is a consensus among the G20 and all countries on the need to reject protectionism?
I think most countries accept that trade barriers, protectionism, would be disastrous. It was disastrous in the 1930s, it would be disastrous now. The key thing, of course, is to avoid the unintended consequences of protectionism, where countries take action with the best will in the world, and obviously they want to help their own people, but they inadvertently affect somebody else. And the best answer to that is to make sure that we all take action together. We really do live in a global economy now. Our next door neighbour is very important, but our next door neighbour is now someone living on the other side of the world as well as someone living down the street. So it's very, very important that we reject any form of barriers to trade.
Chancellor, thank you very much.